Okay, I'll admit, this episode is coming a little bit on the late side. When did I do the first Ben 10 Dragons episode? In July of 2020? What year is it now? But hey, better late than never, right? And like I did with Avengers as Dragons last year when I finally did a third episode of that, I'm gonna try and make these some of the best dragons I've ever done to really flex on me from 3 years ago. So without further ado, Ben 10 Aliens as Dragons, Part 2. Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
It has been some time since I have been hunted by a dragon unprompted by my own actions, but while soaring over a thick forest astride my dragon ally, Violet, I nearly had my life taken by a wild Wyvern. The vicious hunting dragon burst from the trees beneath us, snatching its jaws at Violet, and if it weren't for her great speed, we would have quickly become a meal for this creature. Luckily, the chase was short-lived, as Violet is a portal leaper who can teleport short distances, which aided us in escaping. But the event was admittedly a thrilling and humbling shock that actually encouraged me to look back through some of the dragons I'd studied a few years back. I was able to think further about some truly incredible species, such as the wild Wyvern. I should say that I hold no grudge against this creature for lashing out at us. It is of a species that are known to be vicious hunters, though one with no specific malice towards humans. It was likely just seeking its next meal. As may be suspected from the name, these creatures are wyverns, with largely orange hides, the elders of which having tiger-like stripes along their backs and shoulders. While they have no flames or lightning or frost breath to speak of, they more than make up for this with their keen senses, albeit with one missing from the common roster. You see, these dragons have no eyes, and technically have no vision, though the combination of their incredible sense of smell and impeccable hearing can essentially construct a mental map of everything around them and for a great distance, meaning their perception of their environment is far beyond that of an average dragon or person. Some people have claimed to see elders of this species project the thick quills on their backs as weapons, and while I certainly don't doubt this as possible, I have yet to see it with my own eyes. While coming across this creature was a nice reminder of some of the fascinating dragons that surround me in my world, I would admittedly like for my next encounter with a wild Wyvern to be one conducted at a greater distance. Now, something that's a little bit different about this episode that wouldn't necessarily be noticeable is that all of the art in it is actually being presented in the order I drew it in. So this was the first drawing that I did for this episode, and I was sort of using it as a warm-up. Not like I knew I still wanted it to be really good and stand out, but I decided to use this one as the first one because I wanted to kind of refresh myself on drawing dragons. It has been a little while since I did that. The last few episodes I've done in Tayron's world have been fantasy monster episodes, mostly with the My Singing Monsters series. But also with Wildmutt, I wasn't super tempted to make huge changes in his design, because Wildmutt, I just absolutely love that design. He's one of my favorite Ben 10 aliens, so I basically just went with Wildmutt, his forearms turned into wings, also adding a tail to him like others of his species have had in the show. Pretty sure it's the older ones that have tails, but I don't completely remember. And then fleshing out the design a little bit more, obviously because Wildmutt is a cartoon character, I was referencing images of the live-action version of Wildmutt that showed up in, I think, the first live-action Ben 10 movie, and then I was also just referencing images of tigers, specifically tigers snarling, to get that sort of crinkled nose look, and how I wanted to have the teeth showing. I also did a little bit of referencing images from Monster Hunter, specifically looking at Nargacugas, because those have a similar body shape to what I was doing with this. But overall, this one turned out pretty simple, but simple in the sense that it's exactly how I wanted it to look, basically. The only one little tweak I made at the end to the composition was I noticed that there was a little bit too much empty space between his mouth and the mountains below, slash off in the distance. It just felt a little bit too empty there, so I just kind of throw in a little bit of a roar energy lines kind of thing, just to fill in that gap a little bit more. And while I think that space does still feel a little bit empty, overall I'm happier with the piece, and I think this is probably my second favorite from this episode. I really like this one, but it doesn't quite compete with the Diamondhead one we'll get later. A dragon that I studied around the same time as when I first came across the wild Wyvern is a creature that largely resides in swamplands. I went back to its territory to observe one this week and almost comically quickly, upon finding one, witnessed it using an ability I'd sworn to be myth in my more closed-minded days. The Flaming Swamp Strider is a dragon that is frequently seen to have flames dancing along its arms or wings or sputtering from its maw, though it can douse this when need be. The texture of its hide heavily resembles mossy swamp foliage, so it is easily able to blend in with its environment. Its body has the ability to emit spores that can rapidly increase the growth of the swamplands around it, so if it does end up burning away any of the plant life in its territory, it can quickly grow more back in its place. In my earlier days, I believed this ability to project spores to be the source of a myth surrounding this creature, that I now know is not a myth, that they can use these same spores to control the plants and vines around them to attack or bind prey. I'd dismissed this as an utter impossibility, but quickly on my latest encounter saw the swamp strider I was observing use this very ability to hunt a particularly agile wild boar for a meal. Upon watching it further, I also witnessed it absorbing foliage from the swamps to increase the size of its limbs. Another ability I'd long believed to be fiction. It has led me to question though, has this species always been able to use these abilities so readily, or has the re-emergence of magic in my world as of late made these abilities more possible? While I cannot say yet for certain, I am admittedly glad to see more examples of my younger, less open-minded self being proven wrong as further evidence of how much I've grown in the latest chapter of my life. Now this drawing, I do like the result of. I think it's my least favorite of the episode, which isn't saying that much because I like how all the art in this episode turned out, but there's a few little things that I don't love about it and a few things that I had to fix in the process. One, the tree that its wing is in front of but its tail is behind feels a bit too big. I was trying to use that to help make there be more depth to the image, to show that the dragon is kind of coming forward a little bit. Part of its body's in front, part of it's behind, but the tree just feels too big compared to the ones behind the dragon, and like some of its leaves should maybe be dangling down into the image. It just feels a little bit janky and not working in the way I wanted it to. But then the other thing is the water, because one thing I had to think about is I don't super often do still water that a creature is standing in, so I had to think about how I wanted to handle the reflections. Realistically, we would be able to see the reflection of the trees and the dragon in the water, but I was thinking for my art style and for how long I spend on these drawings, what should I actually have in the water? So I ended up redoing it partway through and just making it kind of like a shadow silhouette of just kind of greener water underneath the dragon to act as like a pseudo reflection of it. And I think that does end up working decently well. I probably have a bit too much water splashing up around its ankles. It kind of looks like 3 of its legs just plunged into the water. But that kind of only really becomes a problem, I think, if you really stare at that area and think about it. Overall, I am pretty pleased with how the water turned out. And then I also noticed at the very end that the trees behind this guy were kind of drawing a bit too much attention and distracting. So what I ended up doing is putting a little bit of a purple wash over the trees behind him, and even in the tree that's partially in front of him, to just fade them out a little bit more and be some contrasting colors to further emphasize the greenness of the dragon. And I think that really helps save this image. With those things added, I do like how this one turned out. And I hope you all like it as well.
Quick reminder that as usual with Dragon episodes, all of the art from this will be available as posters on the PopCross Studios Teespring store, along with ink bundles and sweatshirts and other stuff. But also that the inks and high-res art from this and all my other episodes come out a day early on the PopCross Studios Patreon. For $5 a month, you get access to that, as well as a weekly Design Notes podcast series, which is like the design notes I'm doing in this, but longer and more fleshed out, giving more insights as to how I come up with my stories and artwork and stuff like that. Posters and Patreon linked in the description and probably the pinned comment. But anyway, back into more art. Let's go.
I was soon reminded of another dragon I studied in my younger years that, admittedly, I'm surprised didn't help awaken me to more possibilities back then, as its physiology is truly bizarre. Though, I suppose not necessarily leaping the border into magical territory. I speak of the swirling tarragon. This is a breed of dragon turtle, though one with abilities very uncommon to this family of creatures. For one, it can fly. Obviously not uncommon to dragons as a whole, but certainly to dragon turtles. On top of that, the creature's wings, which emerge from a break in its shell, can rapidly spin, both to give it an alternate form of flight, but also to create a vortex of wind, often used to trap and disorient prey or threats. It can also use the rapid spin of its wings as a melee weapon, though this does risk injuring its wings against tougher foes, so often it will elect to conduct its winds from a distance as a first course of action. This spinning of its wings is possible because beneath its shell the creature's wings are attached to its body via a diverging spine that has a set of spinning vertebrae that bend up into its shell, attaching its shoulders and wings. Without the creature's shell, it practically looks like something that has been poorly assembled by a being attempting to attach wings to a large aquatic reptile. And with no shell in place, the wings would likely break off fairly easily. But luckily, the large carapace helps hold the wings in place and protect the somewhat fragile joint holding the wings to their back. Like with most dragon turtles, these creatures' shells are incredibly durable and keep them safe from most harm targeted towards them, though it is certainly not impossible for one to be slain by prey that manages to sink their teeth or claws into this creature's neck or head or wings. They commonly reside near ocean shorelines or even in the seas themselves, so observing them is a rare occurrence, but one you should revel in if given the unique opportunity. Now, I really like the look of this one, and I guess it would qualify as the weird one of the episode, but it doesn't really end up being that weird. I guess just the concept of a flying dragon turtle is a little bit more out there because they'd be so heavy. Though I guess our Diamondhead one coming up might even technically qualify as being heavier because of what its body's made out of. But anyway, I really like this one, though if I were to get really nitpicky, I think, looking back at it now, I wish I had zoomed us out a little bit more so we could see a bit more of its wings. People at this point are probably sick of hearing me talk about how it can be a little bit tricky with dragon drawings, figuring out composition-wise how to fit the wings in, how much of them should be cropped out. But with this one, I feel like because the wings are a little bit more interesting looking design-wise than some of my other dragons, because they're a little bit thicker and, I don't know, sturdier looking, it might have been a bit more interesting if we could have seen a little bit more of that. Although it might not even have been a matter of cropping out more, maybe just having the wings kind of folded in a bit more, like at a different point of it flapping its wings, so we could have seen a little bit more of that, and it could have helped emphasize the depth of the image a little bit more as well, because this is a little bit more on the flat side compared to some of the other drawings in this episode. I was also taking a little bit of inspiration from images of Gamera, who is also a flying turtle, though not a flying turtle with wings, a flying turtle that shoots rocket jet packs out of its shell kind of thing. But there are some really cool renderings from other artists of Gamera that were great for pulling inspiration for a turtle-like dragon. Love how this one turned out as well, though we're about to get on to what I think is the best one of the episode. Speaking of dragons that should have prompted me to be more open-minded, one of the most fascinating I studied in my younger years was the Diamondhead Petrosaur. This is a mighty species of dragon whose head and wings and arms appear to be made of a crystalline form, almost as if it were a crystal golem, though its torso, lower body, and parts of its tail are more similar to that of a common dragon. It largely resides in high mountain caves, often having to make or enlarge these caves itself, as the creature is nearly 80 feet tall at standing height. This dragon is capable of breathing both fire and lightning, but only after it has absorbed a fair amount of either of those energy types using its inherent absorption ability, done through its crystalline forms. More commonly as a weapon, it will project dagger-like crystals from across its body to impale those it is targeting. This creature is very difficult to injure, as it is heavily heat and cold resistant, immune to many lethal toxins and poisons, and, as mentioned, can absorb energy, so attacks hurled at it by other beasts or dragons can often simply be absorbed to make the beast even stronger. All that, of course, on top of the fact that this creature's crystalline hide is incredibly thick and durable. It is known to be easily harmed by sonic attacks of a high enough vibration, however, meaning creatures like the albino echo imp or Brazilian sky pulse could likely best this beast in a fight if they ever happen to come across one another, well, in a poor mood. I'd also posit that if you are able to injure the Diamondhide's wings over a large body of water, you may be able to kill it that way, as its body is incredibly heavy and would likely sink quite quickly. Not that I encourage anyone to attempt to hunt these creatures. They are not known to be specifically hostile towards humans, and their unique forms are a wonder to behold. I am quite grateful to have had an opportunity to observe and study them in the past. Now this is an epic, top-tier PopCross Studios dragon right here. It was the last one I drew. I spent a little bit more time on it, and funny enough, I was actually, well, obviously Diamondhead is the core of it. I was heavily taking inspiration from two of my other dragons, because I recently did a experimental video type that I'm trying a few of on here called Design Notes. That's a video podcast series, which I actually do weekly on the PopCross Studios Patreon, but I'm also trying out free versions of it on YouTube as well. And in the first one, I went back through my Avengers as Dragons episodes and talked about my improvement between the first and second episode and the third episode a few years later. And looking back at the first dragon I ever did in that series, the Thor dragon, which was very similar to this, like a big, like heavy kind of dragon that's standing upright, taking inspiration from bears. I kind of wanted to try something like that again, but with my more modern, more skilled rendering style. And so I was pulling inspiration from that and from my Black Adam dragon, which I think I was also kind of trying to replicate the Thor dragon, but better with that one, and that is one of my favorite dragons I've done on this channel. So I was pulling inspiration from my Thor dragon, Black Adam dragon, to make this like a big, tall, almost kaiju-like dragon, and make it feel like a beastly elder dragon. And I do really feel like I hit that mark with this one. I mean, like, Diamondhead isn't as powerful as Thor or Black Adam, but just in terms of his stature, it felt like leaning into the similar sorts of ideas and body type felt kind of right. And obviously, I love rendering out ice or crystals or that kind of stuff. I use a colored ink for it, which is not what I would normally do, so I think it helps it stand out from some of my other drawings. And for this, I even rendered out the clouds behind him a little bit differently than I normally do. I have them kind of swirling up and helping us frame the dragon's head, and its wings are helping frame its head, and the crystal sticking out of its back, and it's just all, oh, this one just came together so nicely, and it feels like a big, epic one. Thought about adding some like lightning-y elements or fire elements sparking around its head, but I was just like, you know what? I don't think this one needs it. It stands up on its own. I really love how this one turned out. And I hope you all like it as well.
Well, I very much hope you all enjoyed this episode of Dragons Looking Slightly Off to the Right, and please let me know if there's other Ben 10 aliens that you'd like to see turned into dragons, or other dragon episodes you'd like to see sequels to that I did a long time ago and never did follow-ups to. Also, if you're new here and you enjoyed this, you might like my Avengers as Dragons Part 3 episode or DC Dragons episode. But I also have tons of other dragon episodes on here. And besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is actually from an unlikely source, an anime I've been watching this week called Assassination Classroom. And the quote is that the difference between the master and the novice is that the master has failed more times than the novice has tried. In any important area where you're trying to be successful, your actual success is going to come stacked on top of lots and lots of failures. They're a necessary part of the process, so if you can learn to bounce back quickly from disappointment and failure, you're going to have a much smoother road to wherever it is you're trying to get. I hope that's inspiring, I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. Goodbye.